Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today guys, we are taking a look at the Avenger. I had to put tank in there because unfortunately when I was making the build, the name the Avenger was already taken. So I had to use a different name. But I'm going to go ahead and share this with you guys. This is a new and improved version of this. It's updated to Dawnbreaker, the latest DLC, which will be coming out next week, so you can set this build up now, and then when next week gets here, you shouldn't have to worry about any adjustments or anything. It should be ready. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Avenger build. Now this build I'm gonna do this now. Disclaimer: this is more of a roleplay casual play build. It is a solo play build primarily, but it can be a primary or it can be a main tank in most dungeons. I will say that in both normal and veteran. Alright, going in and taking a look at the build. We are the Avenger, we are Wood Elf Templar. Now, Orc, Red Guard, Wood Elf, even Dark Elf can play this build really well. Anything with a high stamina addition, high health can play this really well, including Imperial and Nord. Nord will be over the resistance cap by a small amount, but it still works. But it works out really well. As you can see, with the Wood Elf, we have 64 points in the stamina. We have 17,936 magicka, 28,566 health, and 32,577 stamina. Magic recovery is coming in at 951, health recovery 397, and then stam recovery is 905. We do have a 2556 weapon damage with a 38% weapon critical. We have 19k spell resist with a 19k physical resist. That is unbuffed. And just to show this buffed, so you guys can see, I'm going to go ahead and throw my resistance buff out and my weapon damage buff. As you can see, we go to 2726 with a 3013 weapon damage. We actually get about 3500. In small group play of weapon damage. In large group play, we can actually get up to about 4k weapon damage, which is kind of nice. It allows us to withstand a lot more of a beating, I'll put it that way. So we do have major savagery at all times when we solo play with this build. The reason why is because we use Expert Hunter, and we also use Tri-Stat Food. So going on to the equipment and inventory stuff, looking at potions and everything like that first, we do use tripods for when we're primarily solo playing. We will use tripods because we have all the buffs that represent this. So we have stam recovery, or the major brutality, major sorcery, major brutality, major savagery already built into our class. We don't need more, so this works out really well, not needing to use this, and we can actually get away with using this. The food we use is the longfin pasty and melon sauce. It's I wouldn't say it's the best food, but it is a inexpensive food to get on the Crown Store, and if you have the recipe to craft it, it's not too hard to craft. Alright, going over the monster sets and the other sets, starting with the monster set, of course, we are using Silatrix. Now, Silatrix, is a set that drops inside of, oh my gosh, can't remember the name, Arx Cranium, and it is the only set, the monster set that drops in there. And it's a really good set. A lot of people don't use this set for much of anything. I find it works really good for tanking. I find it works really good for adding some extra DPS. And it's a really good CC monster set for a tank type, but it's also really good for solo play because it keeps a lot of damage off of you. So the 1 piece adds stamina, 2 piece. When you deal damage, you have a 10% chance to create an earthquake under the enemy that erupts after 1.5 seconds, dealing X amount of physical damage to all enemies within 4 meters, and stunning them for 3 seconds. This effect can occur every 5.5 seconds. The nice thing is that once you activate this, once it goes off, it'll go off again. And because of the time limit and everything that it has, like the cooldown and then the activation time and everything, it actually winds up coming to almost exactly being at the excuse me. It'll usually fire off in your rotations every 4 seconds. So you wind up getting the uptime to where you can proc this constantly on enemies, even if they were CC immune, because it'll fire, and then when it fires again, it's actually when their CC immunity ends a lot of the time. So you can actually kind of keep them CC locked pretty well with this. The next set we're using is Night Mother's Gaze. Now, on live I switched out to the Kvetch's Gladiator. I'm actually moving back to this because I do like this set. The 2-piece adds weapon critical, 3-piece weapon damage, 4-piece weapon critical, and then the 5-piece, when you deal critical damage, you apply major fracture to enemies, reducing their physical resistance by 5,280 for 6 seconds. This is really good because you will keep this applied all the time. You'll have major fracture applied all the time because of this, and you can keep it applied to multiple targets. There is no cap to how many targets you can apply this to, so any enemy you deal critical damage to gets that major fracture, and like I said, you can keep this up 100%, so it's a really nice set for that. The next set we're using is pretty obvious. I mean, we have a really high high health pool. The only way you're going to reach that is with Plague Doctors, and this is what I play on live, guys. So 2-piece max health, 3-piece max health, 4-piece healing taken, and then the 5-piece adds 3,000 max health to you only. So you get this really high health pool, which gives you really good survivability, and it gives you room for error, is what I like to say. If you're really good at getting away with making little mistakes, you can use something like Nightmare, the set that drops in, I want to say Fungal Grotto, but I could be wrong there. It's another good set for solo play and also small group play because it'll apply minor maim to multiple targets. So those are options, but I primarily run Plague Doctors because of the higher health pool and the fact that I solo a lot, and it's not that I'm not a skilled player, guys. You guys gotta understand, I do have conditions that make it to where it makes it really hard for me to solo play or to play even in a group without making mistakes. Like, I need that room for error. So alright, now going over the skill or the traits and enchants on the gear itself, starting with the monster set. The helm itself is invigorating. This is going to increase your mag recovery and your stam recovery. We're not too worried about our health recovery because we don't play off of health recovery. We play off of increased mag recovery and stamina recovery because of the way the build works. You want not a really high amount of stam recovery or mag recovery, but you want enough that it's going to make it to where you're not having issues. So that's why we build the with the invigorating in there. Alright, going over the shoulders now, and we are using a tri-stat enchant in the head. So on the shoulders we are using Divines, max stamina. The reason for the Divines, increased Mundustone effect. We want to have a higher Mundustone effect to make it easier for us and such to keep a higher crit chance, so we can keep that major fracture applied more often. On the gauntlets, we are also using Divines max stamina, and then on the belt and the boots, we are using Divines max stamina. Now, going over the armor types where we have them placed, everything on our body is heavy except for one light, one medium. The belt is light, the helm is medium. Now, I have done this calculation a bunch of different ways to find out what works best, and the thing that works best in this setup is a light belt and medium helm, the rest of it heavy. And this is going to give you a good amount of resistances, it's going to give you a good amount of like survivability, and when solo playing, sometimes you got to make that sacrifice. You got to make that choice. Do I want to be really good at damage, or do I want to be more tanky? And when I say tanky, I don't mean to be a tank. I mean to be more resilient in combat, to where you can take a hit, where you can just stand still and you don't have to dodge roll a lot or move a lot to avoid damage, because your character can just mitigate so much. So that's why we play with the setup like this. Now, moving on to the chest, we are using a reinforced chest. This is going to give us the highest amount of resistances out of all of our armor pieces on this one piece. So getting that really high resistance value really does play well into survivability and damage and everything else. It just keeps you alive better. So we are using Tri-Stat in the chest and also in the legs, and the legs are also invigorating. So the helm and legs are going to be invigorating. I know a lot of people say, well, 22 recovery really isn't a lot. 22 recovery in heavy armor is a lot, especially on a Templar, and especially on somebody who has really bad, resource management. 22 will play into them a lot better, especially if you build for decent resource management. Now, moving on to the jewelry, we are running 2 Trirune rings of Plague Doctor. Now, you do have to transmute these in the Trirune. If you cannot, don't stress it. Play without it, because you'll have about 31,000 max stamina, 31,000 max health. Or 30,000 max health, 31,000 stamina, somewhere in there. It's not bad. It's actually a little bit better, and it gives you just enough to survive really well. So the reason I like the Trirune is because I like to build out all 3 of my resource pools to maximize my capability with all my tools I use. So I like to have access. On the 2 rings, we are using weapon damage enchants, and this is to maximize not only our ability to do damage, but to survive, because one of the abilities we use is based off of our max weapon damage. So if we can enhance our weapon damage, it's going to enhance our ability for one of our abilities to work better. In fact, and it helps with a lot of abilities to work better, and we'll get to that in a minute. Moving on to the last piece of jewelry, the necklace. We are using an infused necklace with mag recovery. This is how we can get that 951 max magicka recovery, and it works out really well. So, sorry about the constant coughing, guys. Allergies are going crazy today. Don't know why. Moving on to the weapons, starting with the two-handed sword we're using. Yes, we are using a sword because of the 5% increase to all damage that we do. It's not just our physical damage, it's all damage we do we get a 5% increase with, and that's why I use a great sword over any other weapons, because I don't use just stamina abilities a lot of the time. I also incorporate magic abilities that help with my my ability to survive, deal damage, that kind of stuff. And it really really comes down to the group dynamic. If I'm solo playing, it helps. If I'm not solo playing and I'm in a group, it helps. So either way, I do use a Nerdhund weapon with an absorbed stamina enchant on this build because it works really well. You can use an infused crusher as well if you wanted to for the main weapon, and it works out quite well. You get 100% uptime of crusher, and it helps in the group play. But if you're not really worried about crusher or like maximizing group DPS when you're playing in a group and you're just looking to clear the content, absorbed stamina is going to be so much better for you because of that resource return that you get from it. Moving on to the back bar, we are using an infused bow. And if you guys want to know the setup here, just so you guys know, I have 3 pieces of jewelry. The boots and the gloves are Plague Doctors, along with the jewelry, like I said. And then the body pieces, everything, so the chest, the belt, and the legs are the heavy, or not the heavy, the Night Mother's Gaze, along with the weapons. I do this so when I swap bars, I don't lose that 3,000 health that Plague Doctors gives me. So on the bow, we are using an infused weapon damage enchant. Now, if you are tanking with this, you can use a crusher here, if you wanted to also. This way you can get a better uptime of Crusher, but you can still get that same amount of uptime with Crusher on the greatsword side. So because you're gonna, the way this build works, you kind of tank with a rotation. It's kind of how the build maximizes its capability, but it's got a weird rotation. So, but the reason for the infused is to increase the enchantment power, so it increases the amount of weapon and spell damage we get to 452 for 5 seconds, and it increases not only the weapon enchantment, but it also reduces the cooldown of the enchantment by 50%. So this is going to go off every 3 seconds instead of every 5. Actually, it's every 2.5 seconds, but since the game doesn't calculate things by 2.5, it's every 3 seconds that it'll reapply the weapon and spell damage. So if you drop like Endless Hail or Arrow Barrage, it'll keep a consistent uptime of this. So, alright, now that I've shown you guys that, we're going to go over the skills. And I'm just going to go over these as fast as I can, so I'm not holding up the video. Starting with your class skills and abilities, make sure you take anything that gives you physical damage morphs or increased things that give you really good damage overall. You will have a lot of abilities that are going to be both magic and stamina. You can take advantage of both sides. Even with the small magic pool, you can use your magic abilities to your advantage in certain situations. So I do unlock every class ultimate, active ability, and passive ability, because I do switch out abilities for different things for different situations. Whether I'm playing in PvE, PvP, or I'm doing dungeons or even trials, I will switch my build around to fit my group needs. So that's why I unlock all the abilities that my class has available. And that includes all abilities. So ultimates, active abilities, and passives. When it comes to weapon abilities, we do use a two-handed weapon, so I unlock the ultimate, active abilities, and passives. Again, you never know when you might need an ability. Like, if you want to play this build as a DPS build instead of like a solo build, you can, in a group dynamic. And it does do decent amount of DPS. It does about 28k DPS. It can get higher to about 35k DPS on the large Atronach. But we're not here to talk about the DPS of this build. We're talking about its solo ability. So, bow is the other weapon we use. We unlock the ultimate, actives, and passives. And then armor skills, you're going to want to unlock the light armor passives, the top 3. Medium armor, you're going to want the top 2 and the bottom 1. And then with heavy armor, you're going to want all the passives. Now moving on to world skills, you can be a vampire or werewolf with this. It's really up to you. I prefer not to play that way because I like to use other abilities that I have access to in my tool set. So I do unlock all the soul magic stuff. And then moving on to guild. Fighters Guild, I unlock the ultimate, active abilities and passives for this build. And then Mages Guild, I do the same thing, because I can use some of these abilities depending on the situation, depending on what I'm trying to do with the build, how I'm trying to access like the play style of the build, to play a different, not necessarily just the damage dealer role or a tank role or a solo role, but to play any role necessary, including a healer. So that's why I unlock the Mages Guild and the Sigic Order as well. I unlock a lot of abilities here because I do use Men's Spirit if I'm playing a healer type. That way I can use the healer heals from this, and I can use the heals from my class, and I don't have to worry so much about having other heals because my class has enough heals along with that one heal to where I can keep a group alive in most dungeon content. I haven't really had a chance to try it in trials as a healer yet, so I can't say. Undaunted, active abilities. Now, this is optional, Overflowing Altar versus the other one, Sanguine Altar. Overflowing Altar just gives you a better synergy for health, giving health back to your allies. And so I like using this one over the other morph. Now, when it comes to all the other active abilities here in the Undaunted line, I do unlock every active ability and passive because I do swap out abilities sometimes. Like, sometimes I don't like to use Blazing Shield. It depends on the content. like when I do V-Maul or Maw of Lorcage, I don't like to tank using Blazing Shield. I use Spiked Bone Shield, and I actually change out another ability on my bar for another skill to kind of like swap their uses. So this way I'm still using a certain amount of magicka and stamina within the build. Alliance War, assault skills, I do take Aggressive Warhorn, Echoing Vigor, and Razor Caltrops, and then for support, I do take Reviving Berry, Efficient Purge, and Stalwart Guard, plus the Magic Aid passive. Moving on to racials, we are Wood Elf. Just make sure you take your passives for whatever race you're playing. Your racial passives can play into your build really well, depending on the type of build it is. In this case, Ifri's Endurance really plays well with this build because it gives you a certain amount of stam recovery, which allows you better sustainability in the stamina area, even in heavy armor. So, and then Hunter's Eye is not too bad for the increase your movement speed by 10% and physical and spell penetration by 1500 when you roll dodge. That can play into your advantage when you're tanking, to improve your ability to do damage to small group trash, stuff like that in dungeons or trials. And then Resist Affliction gives you the extra stamina, poison resistance, and immunity to poison status effect. Crafting, alchemy, medicinal use, very important when using a potion's resulting effects last 30% longer, and then provisioning, gourmand, and connoisseur. Now, again, alchemy and provisioning, these are long-term things, so don't worry about getting them right away. Get them over time. Unlock these, because it can take a long time for some people to unlock provisioning and alchemy. And I know what a lot of people are going to say, but those are the easiest ones to level. They are, but they're also very difficult for those who don't know how to do it, especially when they don't have a ESO Plus account. So, alright, now going over all of the skills and abilities on our toolbar, starting with the first one, we have Brawler. Now, Brawler's the one ability that we use a lot. Doesn't matter if we're tanking, soloing, whatever, we're going to be using this ability a lot. And it does an AoE cleave, hits multiple targets, dealing X amount of physical damage to enemies in front of you. And it also, you gain a damage shield that absorbs X amount of damage for 6 seconds. And each enemy hit increases the damage shield strength by 50% up to 300%. So you can actually get this shield, a massive shield out of this. I've gotten it as high as like 15, 20k by myself. So this is a very powerful shield when used in combination with other shields. Now, the way that this thing works as a tank is you shield stack, and also while you're solo playing, you're going to shield stack just to basically keep yourself alive. It mitigates so much damage that you don't need to block like every attack. You only have to block those attacks that are going to knock you down, stun you, or hit you so hard that it's going to one-shot you. But you can use your shields to absorb a big portion of that damage. And in fact, you can get your shields pretty high, sometimes as high as 20k. So the next ability we have is called Biting Jabs. Now this, when you activate it, you basically stab the enemy with multiple times with an Adric Spear. So it's a glowing spear that you'll stab out, and it does an AoE cone in front of you, an 8 by 6 meter range cone in front of you of damage, and the initial hit deals X amount of damage, and then to the main target, and then each close target to it takes X amount of damage as well, and it does damage every hit for four times. It hits 4 times, dealing that amount of damage. And it also can proc the Burning Light passive of your class, which gives you extra damage. So this is really nice. The next ability we have is called, moving on, this also reduces movement speed, and it gives you Major Savagery, increasing your weapon critical by X amount for 8 seconds. Now, we do use this as our primary spammable, and a lot of people are going to say there's no reason to use Evil Hunter. The only reason why I keep Evil Hunter here is for when I don't use this ability. Because I don't use this ability all the time. I use it a lot of the time. There's times where I also use the two-handed ability Wrecking Blow and put Wrecking Blow here, Brawler here, and then Blazing Shield here, because Wrecking Blow is actually a cheap ability. It's about the same as this, so you can get this ability, and then this will also empower your next light attack by 40% damage, or increases it by 40% damage, but for 5 seconds. So you can use this as a spammable instead of using this. You have two options here. The next ability we use is Blazing Shield. Now this gives us a shield that is based on our max health. So it costs magicka, it gives us based on our max health, and the shield itself absorbs 10,000 damage, it says, for 6 seconds. The portion of this ability scales off your max health, and then it says each nearby enemy increases the shield strength by 4% when the shield is activated. So when you activate this shield, it grows in size. So for each enemy nearby, you can get this shield as big as 20k, because if you have a lot of enemies nearby, it's just going to proc a bigger shield. And then when the shield expires, it explodes outwards, dealing 36% of the damage it absorbed to nearby enemies. So this can also proc that Burning Light, but the nice thing about it is all enemies within a 5-meter range around you will take this damage. So this is really good to keep applied as much as possible. But the way you want to apply this is you always want your Brawler up first, and then you want to activate your Blazing Shield. This way it'll absorb more damage for the 6 second duration, because it also will account for the shield from Brawler. So it'll have to just remove Brawler first before it gets to your Blazing Shield. So it's a really good combination. The next skill we have here is Rally. Now, Rally got a nerf with Scalebreaker because it lost its heal over time, but it still gives you that major brutality and minor endurance, increasing your stam recovery by 10% for 20 seconds. This is why we're using it now, is because we get the weapon damage increase. We also get that minor endurance, which allows us better sustainability with our build, and it also gives us a heal when it ends. So if you activate Rally, you'll heal for X amount when Rally ends, and the final heal is increased by 15% every second, up to a maximum of 300%. So this thing can crit heal you. If it crit heals you, it can crit heal you for like 25k. It's ridiculous how powerful this heal can be. But this isn't our only heal we're using. This is the one we use in those oh crap moments when we get hit by a heavy hit that just about kills us and we need our health back really quick. We're going to Rally. So you're going to be using Rally quite a bit. Next ability we have is Evil Hunter. Now, Evil Hunter, the main reason why we have this slotted is, one, while active, it increases the damage of your stamina costing fighter abilities by 25%. We do only use one Fighter's Guild ability on our bar, and that is the next one we have. But the other reason why main reason why we use is that major savagery. We want that weapon critical increase all the time. We don't want to be using pots to boost when you're solo playing. You don't want to be using pots to boost your weapon damage. You want to use pots to return resources. So this way you have good sustainability all the time. So you have magicka return, stamina return, and health recovery all coming in with that greater ability. So that's why we use this, and we use the Rally. Is we want that major brutality, we want that savagery. So that's why we use those two abilities here. The next ability we use is called Flawless Dawnbreaker. Now this does a lot of damage up front and X amount of damage over 6 seconds, and then after activating, your weapon damage is increased by 300 for 20 seconds. If you're really good with the build, you can pretty much drop Dawnbreaker every 20 seconds. Doesn't matter. It works out that well. Now moving on to the back bar. With our bow, we have Venom Arrow. Now this is really good because this does X amount of damage up front. It does X amount of damage over 10 seconds, and then if the enemy is hit casting an ability, they're interrupted, set off balance, and stunned for 3 seconds. So this is another way to CC enemies, especially at ranged, because if you have spellcasters and you see them getting ready to drop like a a wall of fire, a wall of elements, or an AoE fire ability, you can just snap them with this real quick. Boom, interrupted. and then they can't cast that ability for X amount of time. So really like this ability. The next ability we have is called Arrow Barrage. Now, a lot of people are going to say Endless Hail. Arrow Barrage is more expensive than Endless Hail, and it does more damage over the duration. So this actually comes out to about the same as Endless Hail. It's got a greater range of application, so it's got a 7-meter range of radius that it does its damage versus the 4 or 6 that or 4 or 5 that Endless Hail has. So we use this to keep our weapon damage applied to our targets, the weapon damage enchant, and we also use it because it does a greater area of effect in damage. Next ability we have is kind of our not our oh crap, but this is like, oh, I'm being affected by negative effects. I'm going to cast this. This removes 2 harmful effects from you. So like bleeds, poison, well, you can't be poisoned, but bleeds, chilled, concussed, burning, disease, those kind of things. You can remove those harmful effects from you, and then while in the area, you and your allies are healed for X amount, and enemies take X amount of magic damage every 2 seconds for 12 seconds. Allies in the area can activate the Purify Synergy, cleansing all harmful effects from themselves and healing for X amount, and it scales with your highest offensive stat. So this scales with your max stamina and weapon damage. So this is really good for that aspect because it's amplified by those things. And we primarily use it for the AoE heal and the little bit of damage it will do. Next ability we have is called Restoring Focus. This is where we get our Major Ward and Major Resolve. This increases physical and spell resistance by 5,280. You also recover 240 stamina every second, and then standing in the rune increases your physical resistance and spell resistance granted by 50%. So this is going to give you that higher survivability, and this is how you can tank or play damage dealer, because you get that higher survivability really easily. And it does work out even as a healer, because you can play more of a stamina healer with this build, utilizing abilities such as Ritual of Retribution, Vigor, and because Echoing Vigor on this build isn't too bad either. It does a nice heal over time. It does 10k health over 10 seconds. And it winds up being a little bit more than that, because you do get major or minor mending when you put this down as well. So as you can see, it heals for about 4k every 2 seconds. So this isn't too bad. I really like using the Echoing Vigor with this character, because it does give you that really good heal. And then when you have the higher weapon damage and everything like that from it, you can actually get a lot better heals out of it. As you can see, 4,101. So this just depends on what way you want to play, how you want to use abilities. Again, I'm just showing you. So that's why we use Restoring Focus. The other thing is Evil Hunter. Again, we have it here to increase our crit chance while we're on the back bar. And then our ultimate that we use on the back bar, and this is optional. Sometimes I like to use Aggressive Warhorn back here, even when I'm solo playing, because of that higher max magicka and stamina that it gives you, but also because it gives you Minor Force, increasing your critical damage by 15%. Now this only increases damage, it doesn't increase critical healing, so it's not going to apply to things like Minor Mending, Major Mending, those different things. It just gives you that Major Force, increasing your critical damage output. So I do like to use this sometimes, especially when I'm soloing like public dungeons, or even normal dungeons. I'll use this. But the other ability I like to use is called Ballista. Now this one, you summon a turret. It's not a turret, it's just a bow that floats in the air, and it'll target one enemy and just unleash on them for 5 seconds, dealing a total of 47,281 physical damage. And that damage changes based on your weapon damage. So if I boost my weapon damage as so, you'll see it goes to like 50,000. And then with more weapon damage, it goes up even more and more and more. So it really depends on how much weapon damage you put into your character, on how much Ballista will do. And it can deal a lot of damage. So that's the other reason why I use it. Now that I've shown you guys the skills and all that stuff, I'm going to go over the CP real quick. Now, my CP setup is not like anyone else's. I do not use a meta CP setup. I use a CP setup, which is what I call a universal setup. So this works across any type of build. So anyone using a heavy armor, stamina, DPS type setup, or even a tank type setup can use this. This is primarily made for that purpose. So taking a look here, starting with the red tree, we have 56 in Ironclad. This reduces the damage you take against direct damage attacks by 20%. We do have 4 into Spell Shield. This increases your physical or spell resistance by 413. Templars get increased physical resistance from one of their passives, and with it also 6% weapon damage. But the amount of physical resist isn't quite as much as like a Dragon Knight. So you kind of have to get a little bit of extra in your spell resist to compensate. So you can keep your physical and spell resistance within margin of each other. So that's why we do this. Moving on to the middle tree, we have 31 into Thick Skin. This reduces damage taken from damage over time effects by 13%. But remember, we can cleanse a lot of damage over time effects from ourselves. So we don't need as much in here as some other people might need. Moving on to Hardy, we have 43. This reduces damage taken from physical poison, disease damage. This is any physical poison or disease damage that's reduced by 10%. Then we have 43 in Elemental Defender. This reduces Flame Frost, Shock, and Magic damage, again by 10%. And that's any Flame Frost, Shock, and Magic damage. Alright, moving on to the last part of the red tree here. We have 40 in a Bastion. This increases the effectiveness of your damage shields by 16%. Any shield that is based off of your max health or is increased the way that Brawler and the Blazing Shield or things like that, as long as they don't have a cap on them, this is a great ability to use to give you that higher oomph to the shields. So that's why we use this. Next ability, or next champion level thing we have is Quick Recovery. We have 19 points in here, and this just increases your healing received by 5%. And remember, we are wearing the Plague Doctors, which gives us another 4% healing received, so we actually get a 9% healing received, which is really good. Then we have 34 into Heavy Armor Focus. This increases your physical resistance by 2,980 while wearing 5 or more pieces of heavy armor. And that's about the same as what you get from the spell resist from the class itself. So that's why we put this much in here, and we put the 4 points into the light armor focus. And that's to give us a really good balance. Now moving on to the green tree, we have 40 in the Warlord. This reduces break free cost by 16%. We have 16 in the Sprinter, reducing our sprint cost by 10%. 16 in the Bashing Focus, reducing our bash cost by 10%. Moving on to the middle tree here, we have 43 in the Mooncalf, increasing your stam recovery by 10%, and 75 into Arcanus, increasing your mag recovery by 14%. A lot of people are going to ask me, why don't you put in Tenacity, which increases your magic and stamina for fully charged heavy attacks by 0%. That's because we don't use a lot of heavy attacks. We do, but we don't. We use it enough to keep our resources coming in, along with resource management through recovery. So we're using recovery along with our heavy attacks. And our heavy attacks, because we're in heavy armor, we actually get a 55% of our resource return. So we don't really need a lot more, even though getting up to like 69% is really nice. It's like a 300 point difference, though, between what you get with and without. So I just figured there was really no point when I could build into these two resource returns. Moving on over here, we have 40 into Tumbling. This reduces dodge roll cost by 16%, and then we have 40 into Shadow Ward, reducing your block cost by 16%. Moving on over here, we have 43 into Blast. This increases your healing done by 10%. This allows you better survivability with your heals, and making those heals hit you for more. It really plays well into the kind of character you are. More of a solo player, more of a solo build, more of a, hey, I'm going to go take on the world kind of thing, and it helps out. Moving on to the middle tree, we have 35 in the Physical Weapon Expert. This increases the light and heavy attacks done with two-handed, one-handed, and shield, dual-wield bow weapons, and werewolf form by 20%. Really good. Then we have 40 into Mastered Arms. This increases your damage done with direct damage attacks by 16%. The main reason why we put 75 points into here, though, is because we want to unlock Retaliation. When you block a heavy attack, your next light attack used within 7 seconds deals 30% more damage. This just boosts your ability to deal damage. And then Reposit, anytime you block an attack, you have a 15% chance to deal X amount of physical damage to the enemy, and that can happen every 5 seconds. So no matter what, if you block an attack, you're going to get a 15% chance to redirect damage back to the enemy, and that just improves your not only your survivability, because you can block attacks, but you can also redirect damage back, so it increases your damage capability. Then we have Butcher, and this one increases your damage done with light and heavy attacks by 5% to enemies below 25% health. So this just gives you, once the enemy gets below a certain health threshold, it's going to increase your damage to them with the light attacks and heavy attacks. Moving on over here, we have 56 into Mighty. This increases your physical, poison, disease damage by 12%. Then we have 56 into Precise Strikes. This increases your critical damage and critical healing with stamina abilities by 20%. Remember, we use Rally as a heal, and this is going to be increased. The critical heal from it is increased because of this. So we want to make sure that that heal, for especially that ability, is good and high. Next, we have 40 into Thaumaturge, and this increases your damage done with damage over time effects by 16%. Honestly, with the way this is set up, you really don't need this, because this is just going to improve the damage of your poison injection, your Dawnbreaker, and your I forget the other ability now. I can't even think of what it is. Endless Hail or Arrow Barrage by that 16%. So it's 3 abilities out of like all of the different ones you use, which is nice, but at the same time, you could actually use this other places. You could put in a piercing, you could put into you could even put more into like Precise Strikes or Mighty, or even Physical Weapon X or Mastered Arms. Either one. Like you can really do some other stuff with it. But I like to use it because I don't mind sacrificing those 40 points here to increase those things' damage capabilities. Because my whole thing is, when you're solo playing, you're not there to just solo a boss or whatever. You're fighting everything by yourself. So if you're in a dungeon on veteran mode, you want that survivability. If you're soloing in a trial, or not soloing in a trial, but I mean an overland, and you're soloing world bosses, or you're trying to solo dragons, which this thing can probably solo a dragon. I've just never been able to get to a dragon that I could solo without other people showing up. So it works really good against dragons as well. I very rarely die. It's just overall, this is like probably one of the most self-surviving builds I've ever made. And that's why I play it all the time, is because it's self-sufficient. Like, I don't have to rely on a bunch of people all the time. I made the build to be self-sustaining, self-sufficient, for the purpose of solo play. So, now what I'm going to do is, just to show you guys its capability at soloing, I'm going to go ahead and head to Elsewhere, and I'm going to solo one of the world bosses here. I would solo try to attempt soloing dragon, but I can only usually get him down to about 55 or 35% health before I get wiped out. Not because of my resource management, but just because by then I've been fighting him for like 10-15 minutes. So, now I will admit, if you're looking to kill things faster, this build is not meant to kill things faster. It's meant for you to have survivability, sustainability, and damage capability. So it's kind of like a mix of everything. It's a tank, it's a healer, it's a damage dealer, all in one. And it has to be able to do, you have to be able to do that stuff when you're solo playing. You have to be able to be self-sufficient. You have to be self-reliant, because you don't have a tank and a healer with you. So you need to be tanky, You need to be, you know, have good healing capabilities, and that's the other reason why I chose Templar with this, is it works really well. Dragon Knight's not too bad with this build. In fact, Dragon Knight does work really well with it. Sork works really well with it. Pretty much any class can work really well with this build, so... Oops, I used the wrong potion. Like I said, every once in a while I'll throw in a heavy attack or something. Most of the time I don't really need to do a whole bunch of heavy attacks because I can usually get my potion off before then, so. And always try to direct the enemies to where you can get a lot more enemies in a hit most of the time. Because if you can do this, then you're going to be fine. But yeah, I'm not gonna kill this entire thing. I'm just doing this to show you an example of, like, yes, this build works. I can solo dungeons with this, and the dungeons that you can solo most of the time are pretty much any of the base game dungeons, unless it's a Path 2 dungeon or it's like Direfrost Keep. If you don't know how to solo Direfrost Keep, there is a way to solo it, even without needing 2 people to open the gates to get to one of the bosses. You can solo the whole thing, and you can also solo pretty much any other dungeon in the game, as long as it's a base game dungeon. Now, DLC dungeons are a lot more difficult, a lot more challenging. They are soloable for the most part, some of them are, but you have to be really skilled. Now, I have not soloed any of the veteran difficulty DLC dungeons but one, and it was I guess you could say it was a fluke or an accident, but my group, we were in, what was that dungeon? So it's a dungeon I can't stand, and I'm, watch this, I'm going to get to my dungeon finder, I'm going to remember what it is before I even looked at it. But, nope, I didn't. It is the Ruins of Mazatun was the only one I ever, like, I soloed the end boss from 30 or 55% health to 0. And that's because I couldn't get anybody up. Every time I tried to get somebody up, I'd get knocked down, or I wouldn't be able to have enough time to do it. So I just wind up soloing the boss, and it was kind of funny because it worked out really well. Now, I do have trouble with Chutin. Chutin is really hard to solo, but they are soloable. But when it comes to base game dungeons, and even normal mode or veteran mode, like, I can solo all these dungeons except for Path 2 of, I want to say Fungal Grotto 2. No, I can solo Darkshade Caverns 1 and 2, both normal and veteran. Crypt of Hearts 2, I have trouble soloing a little bit on the final boss, and that's because he has a stun lock that he can get you caught in, and it can one-shot you if you are not careful. So this one, I do have some trouble with. Direfrost Keep, if you don't know the secret to get by it, can be really hard. Tempest Island isn't too bad when you get to the final boss, even on veteran mode. It's just a matter of surviving her hits. If you can survive her hits, you can do this pretty easy on solo. Vollenfeld's really easy to solo if you know the mechanic of the final boss. on normal and veteran. Blackheart Haven's pretty easy to solo. Blessed Crucible's pretty easy to solo. Selene's Web's really easy to solo. One I want to talk about is the City of Ash 1 and 2. A lot of people will say City of Ash 1 it would seem pretty easy to solo versus City of Ash 2. They're both about the same difficulty in soloing. It's just City of Ash 2 is so long, it just seems like it takes forever. So, but yeah. And then when it comes to normal like dungeons, you can normal solo most of these besides White Gold Tower, and the Fungal Grotto too, because there is a one-shot mechanic in there, and there is one-shot mechanics too in the werewolf ones like Moonhunter, and in I forget the other one, March of Sacrifice. There is some one-shot mechanics in there, but if you can get by those one-shot mechanics, then you can survive those. Just like with Frostvault, there's a one-shot mechanic and with one of the bosses, but you can most of the time get by. So when it comes to veteran play, soloing, you can solo a lot of these dungeons. When it comes to group play and you're tanking, or even playing DPS, you can pretty much get through all this stuff on veteran difficulty, and most of it on hard mode difficulty. I do have some trouble getting through some of the DLC dungeons like Moonhunter, March of Sacrifice, Falkreath Hold, Bloodroot Forge, things like that on veteran mode when I tank, but they're not impossible. It's just I'm not as skilled as some players are. So, but a lot of these dungeons, yes, I have even played them on veteran mode difficulty, normal mode difficulty with this build, and it works out really good. This build's just overall, it's just really well rounded. And there's two different setups. This is the solo setup for the build. I do have a tank setup that I use, and then I have a also kind of a support setup that I use, where when I'm in a group and I'm not tanking or healing, or sorry, tanking or just being a DPS, I do have a solo, or not a solo, but a group support damage dealer type setup that just works out really well, and it adds some dynamic support. So, but that's pretty much it for the build, guys. That is the Avenger. Like I said, I had to put tank in there because of somebody already had the name the Avenger, but anyone can use this build. Like I said, you can use the same build on pretty much any class. So you can use the Plague Doctor's Night Mother's Gaze with the Silistrix on any class combination you want, and you can even use the same CP, pretty much some of the same skills, and like I said, use this with any class and it works out. So it just depends on what class it is, how you're using the skills and abilities of the class, what tools you're using, that kind of thing. But yeah, it works out. And that's it. So hope you guys liked it. Sorry it was a little long. Sorry about the coughing. But, you know, hey, I'm not perfect. But that's it for the video, guys, and you guys know what that means. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.